So we can turn that on. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna. Okay, you can just get the focus here. Get this thing right. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna. Yeah, I'm going to be sitting like this, basically, more or less. Just get the focus here. Okay. Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu, Shri Adivini Gadata, Shivas Adi Gaura Bhaktivinoda. Okay, yeah, that'll go good. Yeah. Is it really focused? It's sort of like it's partially focused. Rama Rama Hari Hari. I guess that's okay. Rama Rama Hari 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 Krishna Hari Krishna 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 Hari 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 Ram Hari Ram Rama Rama Hari 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 Krishna Krishna Hari 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 Ram Hari Ram Rama Rama Hari Hari Hare Krishna 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 Hari 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 Ram Rama Rama Hari Hari Hare Krishna 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 Hari 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 Ram Rama Rama Hari 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 Krishna 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 Hari 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 Ram Rama Rama Hari 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 Krishna 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 Hari 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 Ram Rama Rama Hari Hari. Oh my God. Sorry. This thing is, we got to turn down the volume. Rama Rama Hari 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 Krishna 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 Hari 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 Ram Rama Rama Hari 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 Krishna 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 Hari Hari Ram Rama Rama Hari 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 Krishna 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 Hari 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 Ram Rama Rama Hari 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 Krishna 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 Hari 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 Ram Rama Rama Hari 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 Krishna 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 Hari 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 Ram Rama Rama Hari 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 Krishna 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 Hari 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 Ram Rama Rama Hari 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 Krishna 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 Hari 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 Ram Rama Rama Hari 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 Krishna 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 Hari 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 Ram Rama Rama Hari 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 Krishna 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 Hari 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 Ram Rama Rama Hari 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 Krishna 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 Hari 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 Ram Rama Rama Hari 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 Krishna 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 Hari 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 Ram Rama Rama Hari 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 Krishna Hari Krishna 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 Hari 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 Rama Hari Rama 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 Hari 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 Krishna Hari Krishna 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 Hari 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 Rama Hari Rama 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 Hari 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 Krishna Hari Krishna 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 Hari 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 Rama Hari Rama 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 Hari 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 Krishna Hari Krishna 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 Hari 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 Rama Hari Rama 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 Hari 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 Krishna Hari Krishna 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 Hari 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 Rama Hari Rama 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 Hari 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 Krishna Hari Krishna 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 Hari 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 Rama Hari Rama 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 Hari 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 Krishna Hari Krishna 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 Hari 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 Rama Hari Rama 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 Hari 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 Krishna Hari Krishna 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 Hari 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 Rama Hari Rama 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 Hari 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 Krishna Hari Krishna 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 Hari 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 Rama Hari Rama 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 Hari 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 Krishna Hari Krishna 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 Hari 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 Rama Hari Rama 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 Hari 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 Krishna Hari Krishna 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 Hari 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 Rama Hari Rama 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 Hari 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 Krishna Hari Krishna 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 Hari 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 Rama Hari Rama 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 Hari 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 Krishna Hari Krishna 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 Hari 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 Rama Hari Rama 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 Hari 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 Krishna Hari Krishna 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 Hari 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 Rama Hari Rama 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 Hari 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 Krishna Hari Krishna 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 Hari 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 Rama Hari Rama 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 Hari 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 Krishna Hari Krishna 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 Hari 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 Rama Hari Rama 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 Hari 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 Krishna Hari Krishna 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 Hari 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 Rama Hari Rama 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 Hari 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 Krishna Hari Krishna 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 Hari 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 Rama Hari Rama 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 Hari 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 Krishna Hari Krishna 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 Hari 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 Rama Hari Rama 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 Hari 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 Krishna Hari Krishna 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 Hari 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 Rama Hari Rama 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 Hari 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 Krishna Hari Krishna 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 Hari 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 Rama Hari Rama 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 Hari 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 Krishna Hari Krishna 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 Hari 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 Rama Hari Rama 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 Hari 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 Krishna Hari Krishna 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 Hari 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 Rama Hari Rama 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 Hari 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 Krishna Hari Krishna 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 Hari 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 Rama Hari Rama 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 Hari 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 Krishna Hari Krishna 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 Hari 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 Rama Hari Rama 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 Hari 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 Krishna Hari Krishna 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 Hari 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 Rama Hari Rama 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 Hari 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 Krishna Hari Krishna 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 Hari 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 Rama Hari Rama 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 Hari 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 Krishna Hari Krishna 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 Hari 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 Rama Hari Rama 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 Hari 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 Krishna Hari Krishna 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 Hari 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 Rama Hari Rama 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 Hari 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 Krishna Hari Krishna 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 Hari 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 Rama Hari Rama 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 Hari 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 Krishna Hari Krishna 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 Hari 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 Rama Hari Rama 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 Hari 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 Krishna Hari Krishna 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 Hari 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 Rama Hari Rama 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 Hari 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 Krishna Hari Krishna 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 Hari 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 Rama Hari Rama 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 Hari 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 Krishna Hari Krishna 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 Hari 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 Rama Hari Rama 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 Hari 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 Krishna Hari Krishna 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 Hari 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 Rama Hari Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Ram Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Ram Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Ram Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna Krishna Hare 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 Ram Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna Krishna Hare 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 Ram Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Ram Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare Hare Ram Rama Rama Hare Hare Krishna 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 Hare Ram Rama Rama 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 Hare Krishna 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 Hare Ram Jaya Metta Rama Rama Hare Krishna 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 Hare Ram Rama Rama Hare Krishna 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 Hare Ram Rama Rama Hare Ram Rama Rama Hare Krishna 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 Hare Ram Sulochani Devi Dasi, did you get my email with a whole lot more letters to type? Rama Rama Hare Krishna 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 Hare Ram Rama Rama Hare Krishna 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 Hare Ram Rama Rama Hare Krishna Hare Ram Rama Rama Hare Krishna 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 Hare Ram Rama Rama Hare Krishna 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 Hare Ram Ram Hare Krishna 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 Hare Ram Rama Rama Hare Krishna that helped on Zoom. Rama Rama Hare Krishna 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 Hare Ram Rama Rama Hare Krishna 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 Hare Ram Rama Rama Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna Krishna Krishna. Thank you, Sulochana. Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Ram. Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Ram. Hare Ram Ram Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Ram. Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Ram. Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Ram. Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Ram. Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Ram. Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna Hare Ram. Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Ram. Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna Krishna. Oh, Hare 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 Ram. Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna Krishna Krishna. Hare 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 Ram. Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Ram. Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare Ram. Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare Hare. Hare Ram Ram Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Ram. Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Ram. Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare Ram Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Ram. Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Ram Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Ram. Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Ram. Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Ram. Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Ram. Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Ram. Rama Rama Hare Hare Shri Krishna Chaitanya Pramanityananda Shri Adividi Gadada Shivas Hare Goma Govinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Ram. Rama Rama Hare 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 Ram. Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Ram. Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Ram. Ram Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Ram. Rama Rama Hare Hare Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Rama Rama Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Rama Rama Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Rama Rama Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Rama Rama Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Rama Rama Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Rama Rama Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Rama Rama Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna Hare Hare, Rama Rama Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Rama Rama Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Rama Rama Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Hare Ram, Rama Rama Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Rama Rama Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Rama Rama Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna Hare Ram, Rama Rama Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Rama Rama Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Rama Rama Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Rama Rama Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Rama Rama Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Rama Rama Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Rama Rama Krishna Krishna Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna Hare Hare, Hare Rama Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Jai Krishna Balaram Shalini Vrishni Mahabhava Kamalalochana Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Rama Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Rama Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Rama Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Rama Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Rama Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Rama Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Yevgenia, Hare Krishna, Rama Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Rama Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Rama Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Rama Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Gaura Lila, Hare Bol, Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Ram 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Ram. Oh Jyotish Prataram Shamsundar Prabhu Nandarani Namarupa Swarga Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Ram 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Ram Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Ram Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Ram Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Ram Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Ram Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Ram Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna Krishna Hare 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 Ram Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Ram Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Ram Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Ram Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Ram Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Ram Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Ram Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Ram Ram Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Ram Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Ram Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Ram Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna Krishna Hare 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 Ram Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Ram Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Ram Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna Sakyama Krishna Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Ram Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Ram Jai Sandy Hare Bol Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Ram Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Ram Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna Krishna Hare 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 Ram Ram Hare 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 Krishna Krishna Hare 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 Ram Jai Ho Yamaraj Prabhu Shamala Krish Sandy Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Ram Sakyam Krishna Kakripa. It's the mercy of Krishna. Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Ram Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Ram Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Ram Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna Krishna Hare 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 Ram Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Ram Hare Ram Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna Hare Krishna 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 Hare Hare. Here I am, I'm on my own, and I need to phone someone. Oh, Krishna. It's interesting here. Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna Hare Krishna. Oops. Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna Hare Krishna Krishna Hare 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 Ram Hare Ram Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna Hare Rama Rama Hare Rama Rama Hare Hare. Oops. Don't know what's going to happen to Facebook. Can't do two things at once. Haribol, all glories to Prabhupada. Jai Shri Ram. Are we expecting load shedding? Rama Rama Hari 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 Krishna Hari Hari Ram Hari Ram 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 Hari 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 Krishna Hari Krishna. No load shedding. Rama Rama Hari 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 Krishna Hari Krishna 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 Hari 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 Ram Hari Ram Rama Rama Hari 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 Krishna Hari Krishna 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 Hari 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 Ram Hari Ram Rama Rama Hari 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 Krishna Hari Krishna 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 Hari 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 Ram Hari Ram Rama Rama Hari 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 Krishna Hari Krishna 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 Hari 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 Ram Hari Ram Rama Rama Hari 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 Krishna Hari Krishna 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 Hari 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 Ram Hari Ram Rama Rama Hari 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 Krishna Hari Krishna 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 Hari 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 Ram Hari Ram Rama Rama Hari 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 Krishna Hari Krishna 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 Hari 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 Ram Hari Ram 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 Hari 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 Krishna Hari Krishna Hari 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 Ram Hari Ram Rama Rama Hari 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 Krishna Hari Krishna 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 Hari 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 Ram Hari Ram Rama Rama Hari 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 Krishna Hari Krishna 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 Hari 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 Ram Hari Ram Rama Rama Hari 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 Krishna Hari Krishna 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 Hari 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 Ram Hari Ram Rama Rama Hari 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 Krishna Hari Krishna 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 Hari 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 Ram Hari Ram Rama Rama Hari 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 Krishna Hari Krishna 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 Hari 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 Ram Hari Ram Rama Rama Hari 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 Krishna Hari Krishna 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 Hari 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 Ram Hari Ram Rama Rama Hari 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 Krishna Hari Krishna 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 Hari 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 Ram Hari Ram Rama Rama Hari 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 Krishna Hari Krishna 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 Hari 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 Ram Hari Ram Rama Rama Hari Hari Jai Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Adivati Gadada Shasti Galadvanda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Ram Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Ram Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Ram Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna Krishna Hare 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 Ram Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Ram Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Ram Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Ram Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Ram Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Ram Hare Ram Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Ram Hare Ram Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Ram Hare Ram Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Ram Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna Hare Krishna Krishna Hare 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 Ram Hare Ram Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna Hare 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 Ram Hare Ram Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna Hare Krishna Krishna Hare 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 Ram Hare Ram Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna Hare Krishna Krishna Hare 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 Ram Hare Ram Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna Hare Krishna Krishna Hare 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 Ram Hare Ram Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna Hare Krishna Krishna Hare 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 Ram Hare Ram Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna Hare Krishna Krishna Hare 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 Ram Hare Ram Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna Hare Krishna Krishna Hare 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 Ram Hare Ram Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna Hare Krishna Krishna Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna Hare Krishna Krishna Hare 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 Ram Hare Ram Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna Hare Krishna Krishna Hare 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 Ram Hare Ram Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna Hare Krishna Krishna Hare 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 Ram Hare Ram Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna Hare Krishna Krishna Hare 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 Ram Hare Ram Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna Hare Krishna Krishna Hare 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 Ram Hare Ram Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna Hare Krishna Krishna Hare 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 Ram Hare Ram Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna Hare Krishna Krishna Hare 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 Ram Hare Ram Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna Hare Krishna Krishna Hare 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 Ram Hare Ram Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna Hare Krishna Krishna Hare 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 Ram Hare Ram Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna Hare Krishna Krishna Hare 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 Ram Hare Ram Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna Hare Krishna Krishna Hare 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 Ram Hare Ram Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna Hare Krishna Krishna Hare 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 Ram Hare Ram Rama Rama Hare Hare. I was on Skype. Okay. Yeah, I didn't think I could interrupt. Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna Hare Krishna Krishna Hare 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 Ram Hare Ram Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna Hare Krishna Krishna Hare 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 Ram Hare Ram Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna Hare Krishna Krishna Hare 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 Ram Hare Ram Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna Hare Krishna Krishna Hare 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 Ram Hare Ram Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna Hare Krishna Krishna Hare 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 Ram Hare Ram Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna Hare Krishna Krishna Hare 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 Ram Hare Ram Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna Hare Krishna Krishna Hare 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 Ram Hare Ram Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna Hare Krishna Krishna Hare 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 Ram Hare Ram Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna Hare Krishna Krishna Hare 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 Ram Hare Ram Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna Hare Krishna Krishna Hare 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 Ram Hare Ram Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna Hare Krishna Krishna Hare 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 Ram Hare Ram Rama Rama Hare Hare Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna Hare Krishna Krishna Hare 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 Ram Hare Ram Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna Hare Hare Ram Hare Ram Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna Hare Krishna Krishna Hare 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 Ram Hare Ram Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna Hare Krishna Krishna Hare 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 Ram Hare Ram Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna Hare Krishna Krishna Hare 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 Ram Hare Ram Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna Hare Krishna Krishna Hare 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 Ram Hare Ram Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna Hare Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna Hare Krishna Krishna Hare 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 Ram Hare Ram Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna Hare Krishna Krishna Hare 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 Ram Hare Ram Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna Hare Krishna Krishna Hare 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 Ram Hare Ram Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna Hare Krishna Krishna Hare 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 Ram Hare Ram Rama Rama Hare Hare Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Ram Hare Ram Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Ram Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Ram Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Ram Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Ram Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Ram Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Ram Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Ram Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Ram Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Ram Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Ram Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Ram Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Ram Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Ram Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Ram Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Ram Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare Hare. Are we on? Are we on the system now? The temple system, or the yeah, whatever it is. Oh, no, I'm just asking. No, whatever. I'm just asking. That's all. Okay. Whenever you feel it's practical. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna. Hare Ram, Rama Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, 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 Hare Ram, Rama Hare Ram, Rama Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Ram, Rama Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Ram, Rama Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna Hare 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 Ram Ram Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Ram Ram Hare 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 Krishna Krishna Hare 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 Ram Rama Hare 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 Krishna Krishna Hare 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 Ram Rama Hare 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 Krishna Krishna Hare 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 Rama Hare 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 Krishna Krishna Hare 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 Rama Hare 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 Krishna Krishna Hare 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 Rama Hare 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 Krishna Krishna Hare 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 Rama Hare 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 Ram Hare 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 Krishna Krishna Hare 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 Rama Hare 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 Krishna Krishna Hare 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 Rama Hare 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 Krishna Krishna Hare 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 Rama Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama Hare 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 Krishna Krishna Hare 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 Rama Hare 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 Krishna Krishna Hare 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 Rama Hare 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 Krishna Krishna Hare 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 Rama Hare 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 Krishna Krishna Hare 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 Rama Hare 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 Krishna Krishna Hare 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 Rama Hare 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 Krishna Krishna Hare 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 Rama Hare 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 Rama Hare 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 Krishna Krishna Hare 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 Rama Hare 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 Krishna Krishna Hare 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 Rama Hare 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 Krishna Krishna Hare 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 Rama Hare 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 Krishna Krishna Hare 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 Rama Hare 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 Krishna Krishna Hare 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 Rama Hare 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 Krishna Krishna Hare Hare Rama Hare 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 Krishna Krishna Hare 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 Rama Hare Hare Jai Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Adivani Gadada Shastra Gama Divanda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama Hare 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 Krishna Krishna Hare 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 Rama Hare 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 Krishna Krishna Hare 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 Rama Hare 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 Krishna Krishna Hare 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 Rama Hare 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 Krishna Krishna Hare 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 Rama Hare 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 Krishna Krishna Hare 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 Rama Hare 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 Krishna Krishna Hare 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 Rama Hare 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 Krishna Krishna Hare 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 Rama Hare 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 Krishna Krishna Hare 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 Rama Hare 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 Krishna Krishna Hare Hare Rama Hare 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 Krishna Krishna Hare 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 Rama Hare 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 Krishna Krishna Hare 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 Rama Hare 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 Krishna Krishna Hare 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 Rama Hare 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 Krishna Krishna Hare 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 Rama Hare 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 Krishna Krishna Hare 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 Rama Hare 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 Krishna Krishna Hare 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 Rama Hare 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 Krishna Krishna Hare 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 Rama Hare 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 Krishna Krishna Hare 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 Ram Hare Ram Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Ram Hare Ram Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Ram Hare Ram 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 Hare 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 Krishna Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Ram Hare Ram Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Ram Hare Ram Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Ram Hare Ram Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Ram Hare Ram Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Ram Hare Ram Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Ram Hare Ram Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Ram Hare Ram Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Ram Hare Ram Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Ram Hare Ram Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna Hare Krishna Hare 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 Ram Hare Ram Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Ram Hare Ram Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Ram Hare Ram Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Ram Hare Ram Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Ram Hare Ram Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Ram Hare Ram Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Ram Hare Ram Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Ram Hare Ram Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Ram Hare Ram Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Ram Hare Ram Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Ram Hare Ram Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Ram Hare Ram Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Ram Hare Ram Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Ram Hare Ram Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Ram Hare Ram Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Ram Hare Ram Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Ram Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Ram Hare Ram Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Ram Hare Ram Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Ram Hare Ram Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Ram Hare Ram Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Ram Hare Ram Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Ram Hare Ram Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Ram Hare Ram Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Ram Hare Ram Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Ram Hare Ram Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Ram Hare Ram Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Ram Hare Ram Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Ram Hare Ram Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Ram Hare Ram 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 Hare 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 Krishna Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Ram Hare Ram Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Ram Hare Ram Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Ram Hare Ram Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna Hare Krishna 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 Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Ram Hare Ram 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 Hare 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 Krishna Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Ram Hare Ram Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Ram Hare Ram Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Ram Hare Ram Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Ram Hare Ram Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Ram Hare Ram Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Ram Hare Ram Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Ram Hare Ram Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Ram Hare Ram Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Ram Hare Ram Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Ram Hare Ram Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Ram Hare Ram Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Ram Hare Ram 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 Hare 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 Krishna Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Ram Hare Ram Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Ram Hare Ram Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Ram Hare Ram Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Ram Hare Ram Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Ram Hare Ram Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Ram Hare Ram Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Ram Hare Ram Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Ram Hare Ram Rama Rama Hare Hare Jai Deepti Rama Rama Hare Hare Jai Tanuja Charlene Haribol Sarika Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Ram 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Ram Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Ram Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Ram Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Ram Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Ram Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Ram Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare Hare Krishna Hare Krishna. How is the audio? Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Ram Ram Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Ram Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Ram Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Ram Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna Okay, spasiba. And I'll call Mahaprabhu Kripa Prabhu. Our call with Ishan went nicely, right? Okay, that's good. Okay, that's it. Rama Rama Hari Hari. Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda. Shri Advaita Gadadhar. Oops, okay. So this is finished. Rama Rama Hari 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 Krishna Hari Rama. Jai Courtney. Just be careful with that because it's recorded. Rama Rama Hari Hari. Hare Krishna Krishna Krishna. Well, you know how to do it?
I know you showed me once. I can't.
We got to share to IGTV. Share. Then we wait for my picture to come up. Then we hit next. Then we got to do title. I just call it Japa, Japa. And then I'll put just the date because it's the only session, 27 p.m. It's p.m. evening. And then post. And that's the end. There you go. You can turn it off now or anything you like. So, we're almost there. Not quite. So, devotees, welcome, a big welcome to a very special program. This is just a super special Bhakti Shastri program. We did Nectar of Devotion, of course. I think so many of you were there. And you did the exams just, yesterday or the day before or whenever, just last few days. I hope you feel you did okay. I hope you feel you were ready. But now we are launching into Bhagavad Gita. This is really a very major program. Bhagavad Gita, of course, is much bigger than Nectar of Devotion. And of course, Nectar of Devotion is foundational also in terms of the practice of devotional service. But Bhagavad Gita is just foundational all round. What is Krishna consciousness? Who is Krishna conscious? Who isn't? What are the obstacles? How to become? And all these things. And we, devotees, we are going to really make a major, in-depth study of Bhagavad Gita. In fact, it is going to take us plus or minus 4 months. It's something like that. It's something like that. I'll have to get a schedule. I've got a schedule somewhere. Yes, and basically the way we're going to do it, more or less, not exactly, is that in Bhagavad Gita, there are 18 chapters. We are going to spend roughly a week on each chapter, Monday to Friday, 5 days, and then we've divided it into 3 sections. The first 6 chapters, the second 6 chapters, the third. The first 6 chapters we're going to do now over 6 days. Over 6 days. That'll take us into next week, of course. And then, of course, you have the weekends sort of free. Initially our idea was to do lectures 7 days a week, but we decided that would be a bit rigorous for everyone, probably including me. So we'll do Bhagavad Gita, chapters 1 to 6 over 6 weeks. Then we will take some days off for revision and so on. Then we'll do the next 6 chapters, chapters 7 to 12, over, as I understand, 5 days. Anyway, plus or minus, like that. Then again, 5 days, 5 weeks. 5 weeks. Then we'll take some more days off, and then we'll do the last 6 chapters over another 5 weeks, and then there'll be some revision time and then exams. Hopefully you've got the schedule. Yeah, I hope so. Anyway, it's like that. And we will be going verse by verse, in detail. Every chapter has been divided into sections. From verse this to verse that, a particular subject is being focused on. And then we go into those verses and note how they're all connected to the particular theme of the section. You'll catch on to the idea pretty quickly, I'm sure. You'll catch on. It's pretty self-evident as we go. And I think you'll find it extremely interesting. At least those of you who've never done an overview, because we call this Bhagavad Gita overview. For those of you who've never done a Bhagavad Gita overview, I can pretty much assure you that by the time we finish this, you will see the Bhagavad Gita in a completely different light, even if you've read it already, even if you've read it 2 or 3 times. You'll see it after the overview is completed. You'll see Bhagavad Gita in quite a different light. So, So those are just a few words of welcome and introduction. And there's a special thing. What is it I am meant to say to you? Oh gosh. Deva Prabhu sent me a message. I meant to make some announcement. Let me just locate the thing if I can, because you know how much email I've got here. I don't know if we're up to hundreds of thousands, but we got many tens. Okay, let's see here. Let's see. That's fine. All right. For further information, please contact the following email address. It's pretty easy. Let's hope you get it. Education dot BCAIS at gmail.com. Got it? If you need further information, details, like a schedule, and maybe I'll send them an email to send me a schedule again. So, okay, education.bcais at gmail.com. All right, devotees, I think we're ready now to just launch into Bhagavad Gita. It's such an important literature. Anyway, we'll mention different general points about the whole book from time to time. But right now, devotees, right now, we are going to chant some prayers. These particular prayers we'll just chant tonight. Just to get us started, we're going to chant, or I'm going to chant, the Gita Mahatmya. If you want to have a look, get your Bhagavad Gita out, go to the introduction, the last 2 pages, is it 3? I think it's just 2, or something like that, of the introduction. You'll find the Gita Mahatmya, which means the glorification of the Bhagavad Gita. Prabhupada included it in his introduction. So I'm just going to read it, just to give us a little focus, so we can get off to a good start in our Bhagavad Gita overview for Bhakti Shastri. So here we go, verse 1. Gita Shastramidam Punyam Yapatet Prayata Puman Vishnu Padam Avapnoti Bhaya Shokadi Varjita. One who, with a regulated mind, recites with devotion this Bhagavad Gita scripture, which is the bestower of all virtue, will attain to a holy abode, such as Vaikuntha, the residence of Lord Vishnu, which is always free from the mundane qualities based on fear and lamentation. I think you can keep up, Mahaprabhu, Kripa Prabhu. I'm just reading it slowly. Gita Jayana Shilasya Pranayama Parasya Cha Naiva Santi Hi Papani Puravajanma Kritani Cha. If one reads Bhagavad Gita very sincerely and with all seriousness, then by the grace of the Lord, the reactions of his past misdeeds will not act upon him. Malane mochanam pumsam jalasnanam dine dine sacred gitam rita snanam samsara malanashanam. One may cleanse himself daily by taking a bath in water, but if one takes a bath even once in the sacred Ganges water of Bhagavad Gita, for him the dirt of material life is altogether vanquished. Verse 4. Gita Sugita Kartavya Kimanyai Shastra Vistarai Yaswayam Padmanabhasya Mukha Padmad Vinisrita. because Bhagavad Gita is spoken by the Supreme Personality of Godhead, one need not read any other Vedic literature. One need only attentively and regularly hear and read Bhagavad Gita. In the present age, people are so absorbed in mundane activities that it is not possible for them to read all the Vedic literatures. But this is not necessary. This one book, Bhagavad Gita, will suffice because it is the essence of all Vedic literatures, and especially because it is spoken by the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Okay, and verse 5. Bharatamrita sarvasvam Vishnu vaktrad vinisritam Gita gango dekam pitva punar janma na vidyate. By drinking the Ganges waters of the Gita, the divine quintessence of the Mahabharata emanating from the holy lotus mouth of Lord Vishnu, one will never take rebirth in the material world again. In other words, by devotionally reciting the Gita, the cycle of birth and death is terminated. Connectivity issues. Well, I don't know what to say. It seems to be going smoothly here. It's going out very smoothly. We can see all the figures for the broadcast. Does it look okay to you? Facebook? Anyway, it's all right. It's definitely from my computer. It's going very well. So there are two more verses. Sarvopanishado Gavo Dogda Gopala Nandana Partovatsa Sudhir Bhokta Dugdam Gitam Ritam Mahat. One who drinks the water of the Ganges attains salvation. So what to speak of one who drinks the nectar of Bhagavad Gita? Bhagavad Gita is the essential nectar of the Mahabharata, and it is spoken by Lord Krishna himself, the original Vishnu. Yeah, I've got a monitor, and it's going well on the monitor, as well as going out nicely from the computer. Okay, here's the last verse. It's a special verse. Ekam Shastram Devaki Putra Gitam, Eko Devo Devaki Putra Eva, Eko Mantras Tasya Namani Yani, Karmapyakam Tasya Devasya Seva. In this present age, people are very much eager to have one scripture, one God, one religion, and one occupation. Therefore, Ekam Shastram Devaki Putra Gitam. Let there be one scripture only, one common scripture for the whole world, Bhagavad Gita. Eko Devo Devaki Putra Eva. Let there be one God for the whole world, Devaki Putra, Sri Krishna. Eko Mantras Tasya Namani, and one hymn, one mantra, one prayer, the chanting of his name. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Karamapyekam tasya devasya seva. And let there be one work only, the service of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Sri Krishna. Yes, so there you go, devotees. That is the Gita Mahatmya from the end of Srila Prabhupada's introduction to Bhagavad Gita. Now let us offer a few of our prayers. Nama Om Vishnupadaya Krishna Prestaya Bhutale Srimati Bhaktivedanta Swaminiti Namane Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pracharne Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Pastyachade Shatarne Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Sri Advaita Gadadha Shivas Adi Gaura Bhaktavrinda Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Vanchakalpatarubhyascha kripa sindhubhya evacha. Patitanam pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo namo namaha. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. All right, so what's our next step? Our next step is going to be a historical step. Let's just have a very brief look at the history behind the Bhagavad Gita. Yes, how did the Bhagavad Gita come about? Of course, this is basically Mahabharata, but anyway, listen to this, just for a setting, a context, historical context. So the Kuru dynasty had been ruling the planet for some time. A person named Vichitravirya was the king. And, like I said, this is very brief. He had two wives, Ambika and Ambalika. But according, at least, the way it's described in Srimad Bhagavatam in the first canto, is it the 9th chapter? Actually, I forget the chapter, but I was just reading. It says there, he became too attached to his two wives, and as a result died of a heart attack induced by tuberculosis. Srimad Bhagavatam seems to say that. So therefore, his brother was called to impregnate those two wives of the now deceased Vichitravirya. But do you know who was the brother of Vichitravirya? The brother of Vichitravirya was none other than Srila Vyasadeva. Srila Vyasadeva. So Vyasadeva was called then to impregnate those two wives. So okay, that was something which was done in those days. It was according to Shastra, it was possible, and it was sometimes done. If the husband, for example, was unable to have children or died, these types of situations. In this case, of course, the husband had died. So the brother was called. The brother was called. And he would do it simply as a matter of duty and then just go on his way. So now there was a problem here, though. The problem was that Vyasadeva physically, how to say, we don't want to say anything improper, but He was not very handsome. In fact, he looked really, really very unusual. He was like a dark gray color, and he really didn't look attractive. He really didn't look attractive. So therefore, when he came to these two queens, the first queen, who was Ambika, she saw Vyasadeva and she thought, oh my gosh. And, she's just too much taken aback. So she closed her eyes. As a result, the first child, they were all sons. The first son, Dhritarashtra, was born blind. So then Ambalika was the second. So Vyasadeva again dutifully came, and she saw him, and she became so disturbed, shocked by his appearance, she turned white, not white like me. Look, you can see me, can't you? I'm not exactly white, am I? Sort of cream color. But she turned white like a sheet, as they say, just white. As a result, the second son was Pandu, and he was born white. So this was all a bit extraordinary. So then a servant girl was called, and she handled everything very nicely. Very nicely, no problem at all. As a result, but she was a Sudrani, maidservant. As a result, and of course everyone knew how things were going on. So as a result, the son that she bore, who was Vidura, who was a great devotee, he was not accepted as being like one of the regular brothers. He was regarded as a more or less like a Sudra. So he was part of the family. He was included in whatever was going on in the family, but he was not respected. He was not considered, not taken seriously. Although he was actually a very great personality. In fact, he's actually an incarnation of Yamaraj, but that's another story. So now Dhritarashtra is the oldest son, but he's blind. According to Kshatriya Dharma, if a Kshatriya, someone who is in line for the throne, is blind, then they cannot become the king. They cannot become the king, because the king is not just some sort of big administrator. The king is the chief defender of the kingdom. He's the head of the military, head of the minister of defense. And whenever there's any attack, he must lead the army into battle. And Dhritarashtra was blind. So there's not really any question of such a person being able to give that sort of leadership, which was essential for the king to be able to do. So therefore, Pandu became the king, who was white, which is fine. It's fine. He has the qualification, in the sense at least he's born. He's born in the right family and he was trained. But then something very unfortunate happened to him, that he, one time he was in the forest and he saw a male and female deer in the process of conception. And somehow he got the inspiration to shoot the male deer, and he did, and killed the male deer. But he did not know until that point that actually this was a sage and his wife conceiving a child in this sort of whatever unusual way, but that's what they were doing. So then the sage cursed him that you've killed me when I was involved in this activity. So I curse you that if you ever or whenever you try to conceive a child with your wife, you'll die. And he died. He died. The Pandavas were born, but he died. So now the kingdom, or even the planet, has no ruler. So what to do? Yudhisthira, who was the oldest of the Pandavas, Yudhisthira was too young. He's next in line. He was too young. So therefore Dhritarashtra took the throne just for the time being until Yudhisthira became old enough. And he just managed as a proxy. Actually, that's it, as a proxy. He managed the kingdom for the time being. Shri Shri Radha Radhanath, Shri Giri Govardhan, Shri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, Ki Jai. Yes, now of course he's blind, which, makes it all extremely difficult, even just as a proxy. So therefore he engaged his oldest son, Duryodhana. Dhritarashtra had 100 sons. That's another story. Phew, that's really another story. So, of the 100 sons, Duryodhana was the chief. And so he was actually managing the kingdom. So therefore we find here and there in the literatures, Duryodhana is referred to as the king. The king said. Even though Dhritarashtra technically was in the position of king, but because of his bodily defect, he was not able to carry it out. What to speak of fighting to defend the kingdom, but just the general management, he was also not really able to do. So between Dhritarashtra and Duryodhana, because this went on for some time. Yudhisthira was young. He was a small boy when Pandu passed away. So Dhritarashtra and Duryodhana were managing the kingdom for a good number of years, and they became really attached. So when Yudhisthira came to that point that he was old enough to take over, then by all sorts of diplomatic means and sometimes not so diplomatic means, Dhritarashtra and Duryodhana avoided handing over the kingdom. We're not going to go through all of that. That's a whole story. So they tried to kill the Pandavas, and anyway, that's Mahabharata. So eventually the Pandavas were banished to the forest for 14 years. And when they returned, the Dhritarashtra, Duryodhana, they approached them and asked for, can we have our kingdom back, please? No. They had all sorts of reasons why not. Can we at least have one village each? Just a village each, because we're Kshatriyas. We have to live by ruling and defending. But they were told no. So then it became apparent that there was going to be war. And that's the background to the Battle of Kurukshetra. That's the background. So now, speaking of Bhagavad Gita, in terms of the battle, sort of chronologically speaking, the way that our acharyas tell it is that during the battle, Dhritarashtra was nearby. He was nearby. And of course, he wasn't able to see much, but he was near the battle. And Sanjay, his secretary, was reciting to him, seeing directly, and reciting to him what was going on. But then after Bhishma was killed, they returned to Hastinapur. And there in Hastinapur, it's partway through the battle, I forget which day, but it's partway through the battle, and Sanjay from Hastinapur, and if you know the geography, Kurukshetra is 250 kilometers north of Hastinapur, or current-day Delhi. Sanjay, by what Srila Prabhupada referred to as transcendental television, was observing what was going on and explaining that to Dhritarashtra, but in Hastinapur. Yes, so that's Bhagavad Gita. Bhagavad Gita means Sanjay is reciting to, explaining to, describing to Dhritarashtra what happens in the battle. Or, Bhagavad Gita at least is describing what happens in the build-up to the battle, just coming up to the start of the battle. So let's bring out, before we actually read the first verse, which we'll do in a few minutes, let us bring out a few general overall points about the structure of Bhagavad Gita. We mentioned how in our overview, our seminar now, over the next 3 or whatever months, or more than 3 months, we're dividing it into 3 parts. The first 6 chapters, the second 6 chapters, and the third 6 chapters. This is because Bhagavad Gita is naturally divided into those 3 sections in terms of subject matter. The first section, chapter 1 to chapter 6, is discussing yoga, different types of yogas, particularly karma yoga, but ultimately bhakti yoga. That point about particularly bhakti yoga, it really becomes very clear right at the end of the 6th chapter. the very last verse, when Lord Krishna explains that of all the yogis, because he's already in the first 6 chapters described different types of yogis doing different types of yoga. So of all yogis, the devotee, the bhakti yogi, is the best. So that's chapters 1 to 6. Then chapters 7 to 12 are discussing specifically bhakti yoga, that topmost yoga, from different perspectives in different ways. So in a sense, and of course we'll mention it when we get there, in a sense, I mean, we'll talk about it a bit more when we get there. In a sense, the middle 6 chapters from 7 to 12, that's the main part of Bhagavad Gita, in a certain sense. Then the third section from chapter 13 to chapter 18 is discussing basically Gyan, different types of knowledge, which are connected with Krishna consciousness. They're not just, just some unrelated matters, but they're different types of knowledge in connection with Krishna consciousness, but there's some detailed descriptions. If you're familiar, then you would know chapter 16, for example, the divine and demoniac natures. And it's mainly actually the demoniac nature. Chapter 13, nature, the enjoyer, and consciousness. Discussing about Brahman, the nature of the soul, the modes of nature, how this world is working. Chapter 14, the modes of material nature, a detailed discussion about the 3 modes. So this is all different types of knowledge, but in relation to Krishna consciousness. not as you could say vital as what is there from chapter 7 to chapter 12. Except, of course, the last chapter, which is a summary. Chapter 18 is a summary of the whole Bhagavad Gita. And there you get some very famous verses, Manmana Bhava Madbhakto, and these types of verses, Sarva Dharman Parityaja, Mam Ekam Sharanam Vraja, which ultimately are the most important verses in the Gita, you could say, because they're focusing, giving the final, clear and emphatic focus to devotional service. So, now you might wonder why, if Bhagavad Gita is Lord Krishna trying to convince Arjuna to fight as a service to him, to the Lord. And Arjuna agrees, and then he gets ready to fight. That's the goal. The goal really of Bhagavad Gita is to convince that we must serve Krishna. We must serve Krishna. That's what Bhagavad Gita is all about. So, and the middle 6 chapters, they're going into detail about serving Krishna in all from different perspectives. You'll see when we get there after a while, it's deep. It's very deep, very interesting, very inspiring. And then the last chapters, other than the very last chapter itself, there are all these different things, the modes of nature. A lot of it is not as inspiring. or important even as the middle 6 chapters. And of course, when we read a book, basically when you read any book, the book begins at the beginning and culminates at the end. When you get to the end, generally, everything comes to the climax, whatever that is going to be, but not in Bhagavad Gita. Of course, there's the summary, but it's not the same because it's summarizing the whole Gita. It's also summarizing about the modes and the different types of yoga. It's summarizing all the subjects, but finally pointing to devotional service. So you might wonder, why is the book structured like that? Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur, who's one of the main devotees who translated and commented on Bhagavad Gita in detail, he has given us a number, 6 reasons or types of considerations to be borne in mind when we think about this point. Why is bhakti, the subject matter of Bhagavad Gita, discussed mainly in the middle? So listen to this. These are the 6 reasons. Number 1, he says, because it is rahasya. Rahasya means secret. Therefore, it's hidden in the middle. It's not at one end or the other, where it would sort of be more easily visible. It's there hidden, sandwiched in the middle. Here's another reason, that the first 6 chapters, they're focusing on different types of yoga, ultimately bhakti, but it's only the last verse. And it's not only the last verse, actually, but particularly it's the last verse. Otherwise, as we'll see as we go through over the next few weeks, through these first 6 chapters, we'll see that, for example, chapter 3 and chapter 5 are both specifically titled Karma Yoga. And they're very much focusing on Karma Yoga in slightly different ways. But so in those first 6 chapters, at least the verses themselves are focusing on yoga, and of all the yogas, what gets the most focus is Karma Yoga. So therefore, Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur says that bhakti gives life to karma and jnana. Karma meaning karma yoga, basically. Or you can say bhakti gives life to other forms of yoga also, if you want. But particularly they say bhakti gives life to karma and to jnana. So karma yoga was the main subject quantitatively in the first 6 chapters. And in the last 6, jnana, different types of jnana, are definitely quantitatively given more emphasis, more prominence. So, but without bhakti, karma and jnana, they just don't have the Shakti. They don't have what it takes to really be vital in and of themselves. They tend to become somewhat dull. But when they're in contact with bhakti being in the middle, and they're in contact, then they get some life, some vitality, and some attractiveness. Then here's a third reason, that out of respect, the subject, the main subject, is such a deep, profound, most profound subject of all subjects. Out of respect, it isn't just openly displayed. Yeah, not just sort of thrown out in front of just anybody. Out of respect, it's kept a little in the background. And then the fourth reason, that it is the king of knowledge. Even in the 9th chapter, Krishna describes it as Rajavidya, the king of education or the king of knowledge. So when a king travels, the king travels in an entourage. There's a party like the lead party, and then there's the party behind, and he's in the middle. So similarly with this knowledge of bhakti in Bhagavad Gita. Then the fifth point, that bhakti gets a little protection from karma and jnana. There's a little security, a little sort of, what would you call it, a buffer zone. There's a little buffer zone around it to give it a type of protection. And then the sixth is being placed in the middle. It's not so obvious. It's because it's a subtle subject. So again, it's not so obvious. It's just in sort of in reserve a little. Okay, now the last thing I'm going to mention in terms of background before we actually read the first verse, which we're going to read this evening, is just a little side point, really. It's just maybe it's coincidence, maybe it's not. But it's interesting that the number 18 has prominence in Bhagavad Gita, in Vedic culture, actually. Yeah, in Mahabharata. So there are 18 chapters of Bhagavad Gita. In the Vedic literatures, there are 18 Puranas. And then there's also 18 Upa-Puranas, or secondary Puranas. The battle took 18 days. And in the battle, there were 18 Akshohinis, they call them, of warriors. Means sort of like sub-armies or battalions in military terms. Battalions. Huh? Oh, okay. Corps. Acha. Okay. Yes, so there you go, devotees. So now let us enter into chapter 1. Chapter 1 definitely has a structure. We're not going to go through, I'll go through the structure tomorrow night. From what verse to what verses, what subject discussed, and then from the next whatever verse to some other verse, another subject, that we'll do tomorrow. But I want to read to you the very first verse, and not really discuss it at length, but just bring out a very important, very interesting point about the first verse, which maybe many of you, or some of you, however many, are not aware of. And it is important, and it's very nice and interesting. So let's just read the first verse. Dhritarashtra uvacha, dharmakshetre, kurukshetre, samaveta yuyutsavaha, mamaka pandavaschaiva, kimakurvata sanjaya. So Dhritarashtra uvacha. This verse is spoken, first verse of Bhagavad Gita, is spoken by Dhritarashtra himself. And he's speaking to Kim Akurvata Sanjaya. He's speaking to Sanjay. We mentioned how Sanjay was reciting all these things to Dhritarashtra. So here's the translation. Dhritarashtra said, O Sanjay, after my sons and the sons of Pandu assembled in the place of pilgrimage at Kurukshetra, desiring to fight, what did they do? You know, we'll go through the purport and, you know, the different ideas that are drawn out tomorrow, but it's a sort of like a rhetorical question, or you might even say it's a silly question. It's like saying, if someone he sat down with this wonderful plate of prasadam in front of him, many preparations, so nicely cooked, everything was ready, and what did he do? Well, what do you think he did? He didn't just sit there and look at it. And so Dhritarashtra's sons and the sons of Pandu assembled in the place of pilgrimage at Kurukshetra, desiring to fight. So what did they do? Well, what do you think they did? Yeah, they fought in due course. Now, the point I want to bring out is that this, of course, this is a very specific question. It's a very specific question. And the specificness of it is not what did they do. The significance of it is who won the battle, or if not who won, because it's just about to begin, but who is going to win the battle. We'll discuss that tomorrow night. That this is really what Dhritarashtra wants to know. How does it look? How does it seem? Who's going to win the battle? This is his question, presented in, you could say diplomatic or roundabout ways, something of that sort. So it's a question, and the question is answered in Bhagavad Gita, very specifically, also in sort of slightly roundabout ways. But when you understand, how the roundaboutness is working, then you'll see that this particular verse I'm going to read also right now is very specifically, in a roundabout way, very specifically answering the question, who does it seem is going to win? What's the likelihood there? And what is this, devotees? This is the very last verse of Bhagavad Gita. The two are connected. Bhagavad Gita is one unit, held together, you could say, sandwiched together between the first verse and the last verse. And everything is sandwiched in there together. So here's the last verse. And this is Sanjay speaking now, speaking to Dhritarashtra, back there in Hastinapur. Yatra Yogeshvara Krishna, Yatra Partho Dhanurdhara, Tatra Shriya Vijayo Bhutya, Dhruva Nitya Matir Mama. Well, wherever there's Krishna, the master of all mystics, and wherever there's Arjuna, the supreme archer, there will also certainly be opulence, victory, extraordinary power, and morality. That is my opinion. That's the opinion of Sanjay. That's his answer to the question, the roundabout question of Dhritarashtra. Oh, what did they do? Did they sit down and have a cup of tea and a chat? Or what did they do? No, he wants to know. Who's going to win? What's going to happen? Tell me. But he's doing it in this diplomatic way. And Sanjay, who's a master diplomat, he answers the question as far as he can see. I mean, what is he meant to say? The battle hasn't started, actually. There's still 18 days to go. But he's saying, if you ask me my opinion, then, well, whichever side has Krishna and Arjuna, as far as I can see, that's the side which is likely to win, if you ask me. That's my opinion. And of course, well, he's a devotee. Sanjay is a devotee, and he knows. You cannot defeat Krishna. It's crazy. It's completely crazy. But he's putting it very gently and softly. He doesn't want to say, oh, listen, all your children are going to get slaughtered. Shri Shri Radha Sri Giri Govardhan Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu Ki Jai. So he doesn't want to say like that, but he's saying that. He's saying it in this diplomatic way. So like this, Bhagavad Gita is held together by these two verses. The first verse and the very last verse. So there you go, devotees. We've made a start. And tomorrow, well, we're going to go on for however many days, 5 or 6 days more, 5 days more, something like that, going through the chapter. And we'll start with that all tomorrow. So thank you all very much. Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai.